as Ustaz Jalaluddin said, um, we are now on page 17, and we're looking at what is the meaning of tribulation. And what we covered, we just started this at the end of the last session, is we said that tribulation, as the Imam says here on page 17, is actually that which penetrates the innermost parts of the soul, and thus the heart is afflicted by its bitterness and agony. So tribulation is something that is on the inside, and it's not something that we can measure on the outside. And we're going to look at this again, excuse me, at the end of the chapter where he talks about it's not the affliction itself that causes the hardship. It's the inability of the soul to deal with it and to rise above it and to overcome it. So again, on page 17, the Imam says that there's not a single person who does not fall into tribulation. There's not a single person. Everyone has trials and tribulations in their lives, and you cannot assume that someone is super happy, or they're perfectly content, or they're perfectly satisfied, and they're not troubled by anything just by outward appearances or outward trappings. And just in the same way that you can't assume that someone's absolutely miserable because of their outward state. So I think the example we gave last time, we said, someone could be blind or disabled or poor, and you might assume that this person is extremely depressed, full of grief and sorrow, but the reality could be that they're actually content and they've accepted it, and they said, this is from my Lord and I accept it and I'm content with it. Whereas someone else, you might see them with a big fancy car and a wonderful house and a great family and so on and so forth, and you think, oh, this person must be so happy, but the reality is that this person is actually constantly stressed, constantly anxious, losing sleep at night, always worried about his businesses or his investments or his future projects, whatever it is. So we cannot look at the outward. Really, it all goes back to the heart and the soul, and we don't have access to these things. We can't see these things. And this is why I think I mentioned in the last session, I went over the example of, and it's in the video as well. I think I shared the video as well. Imam Sha'arawi even talked about this, the wisdom of the Chinese wise man. And he has groups of students, and he's a group of students, and they're all complaining about their tribulations. And he says, well, why don't you all, each one of you, take a piece of paper and write down your tribulations, write down everything you're going through, whether it's a financial problem, whether it's a health problem, it's a death in the family, you've fallen out with somebody, maybe you've fallen out with a brother, you've fallen out with a sister, whatever it is. You write down all your tribulations, and then we come back a week later, and we'll look. So that's what everyone does. Everyone writes down their tribulations on a piece of paper, doesn't put their name on it. That's key. No one puts no one puts his or her name on it. Everyone comes back a week later, and the papers are just there stacked up in a pile. And the wise man, their teacher, he says, okay, go find your tribulation, find your paper. So everyone's picking up the paper looking for their tribulations. And then while they're in the process of looking for their tribulations, they get a chance to read other people's tribulations. Like, oh no, this isn't me. This isn't my paper. Where's my paper? I want my paper. And then you start realizing the wisdom of all of this. And this is a good practice for you. Is like when you think about your tribulations, maybe ask someone about what they're going through. And I can say from my own personal experience, every time I hear about someone else's tribulations, I see my tribulations as small. And you see the wisdom in the law saying, in the end of Surah Al-Baqarah, La yukallifu Allahu nafsan illa wus'aha. Allah does not burden the soul more than it can bear. And each and every one of us is individual and unique. We all have our capacities and our abilities to deal with tribulations. So this brother here can deal with tribulations that this brother here can't, but this sister over here has tribulations that she can deal with that no one else can, and so on and so forth. Everyone is unique in this regard, and Allah knows what each and every one of us is capable of. Now, the Imam goes on and he gives a few examples on pages 18 and 19. He gives examples. He says someone might have a little bit of wealth and be content, while someone who's very wealthy might be constantly anxious and distressed. And I alluded this before, again, someone who could be poor, or disabled, blind, He also gave this example. He said he said, that same wealthy person or a similar wealthy person might be in love with a woman. He might be madly in love with a woman, but he can never have her for whatever reason, and therefore he's extremely sad. So you might assume that, again, from outward appearances and outward trappings, you might think this person is happy, this person is content, but they have this feeling of something seriously missing in their lives, and therefore they're very, very sad. They're very, very grieved. And then on page 19, he gives a very, very good example in the middle paragraph. He says, you might also see someone who sleeps all day and parties all night. This is an example of someone who's always, like he says, a life of absolute libertinism. So someone who just has a very sort of, you might think it's a very carefree life. Maybe this person inherited a lot of money. Maybe this person struck it rich in the lottery or whatever it is. Well, how old will be that? But this person has lots of money and free time, so they just sleep all day, party all night. So you think this person's happy? He's wearing fancy clothes, he's going to fancy restaurants and fancy clubs, but his soul and his heart are actually deeply troubled. His sleep is not pleasant. His sleep is grief and worry. Now, the Imam doesn't use the word, but this is essentially what we call in English escapism, right? You're trying to escape from reality, or you could say to escape from having to contemplate reality, right? This is something that's very, very common in Western countries. To see people constantly drinking alcohol, people constantly want to be entertained, constantly watching movies, playing video games. Some people, for example, and it's sad, sometimes Muslims fall into this as well. There are people who they always have to have noise on in the background, like in the sense that quiet actually makes them nervous and anxious. So they're always listening to something like a YouTube video. They're always just listening to. I noticed this with someone I know, a Muslim brother I know who was visiting. I started noticing, like, every time he was just by himself, like he's in the kitchen making a sandwich, all right, or he's in the bathroom or something, I can always hear like noise on in the background. Like, what's going on? And I said, are you addicted to noise? And he actually confessed. He said, yeah, because it's a sense that if there's no noise, that makes you nervous, makes you anxious. Now, he's a Muslim, alhamdulillah, so I'll give him husnul done. But for a lot of people who are not Muslim, the absence of noise disturbs them because it forces them to think, right? If the noise isn't there, their thoughts come out and they start thinking about things. They start questioning things. They start wondering about things. And that leads to stress and anxiety. And the Imam's going to get onto this in the next chapter, which we'll look at. Now, another thing is, he also mentioned on this page, on page 19 going into 20, the Imam also mentions, he says, there are also people, or the person who's cut off from Allah. There'll be people who are cut off from Allah, but are constantly thinking about man, life, and the universe. So there are people who have big questions. They have big questions about man, life, and the universe. So, why am I here? Why was I existed? What's the purpose of life? Why was all this brought into existence? But they've been cut off from Allah. Maybe because they've made a conscious choice to be an atheist. Sometimes people think like, oh, it's scientific. The world is material. There is no God. And they've fallen for that. But then when they start thinking and pondering and reflecting about the nature of the world, they're cut off from the actual answer. And therefore they cannot find, as Imam al-Buti says, they cannot find any satisfactory answer. And this can trouble them so much that they actually develop an aversion. They actually start to loathe and despise and hate luxury and comfort because they see that as a distraction. They're really, really troubled. They're trying to figure out why they exist. Why are they alive? What's going to happen when I die? Why was this whole world created? Or they might not say created. They say, why is it here? Why is it here in front of us? They don't understand this. And he says that someone like this, again, outwardly, they might seem comfortable. You might think that they have the means of luxury and wealth. They might have a good job. They might have a nice house. They might have a nice car. They might have a nice family, all these kinds of things. But they're actually very troubled. And he says someone like this, because they're so troubled, actually leads them to madness or suicide or suicide. Now, reading this, some examples you can think of, look at some of these Western philosophers. Look at someone like Nietzsche, like Friedrich Nietzsche, the German philosopher, who did not fully understand Islam, but became very, very troubled by European thought, became very, very troubled by Christianity. And in the end of his life, he went what? He went mad because these questions were bothering so much. And you see examples of this again in the West. You see examples of this in the West, especially, oddly enough, sometimes comedians are like this. Comedians in the West, because comedians tend to be people who part of their attraction of humor is the fact that they notice things other people don't. You know, they'll make you laugh because they'll say, "Have you ever noticed a lot of people say this? Have you ever noticed a lot of people do this? Have you ever noticed that when you're driving on the highway, if someone's going really fast, you call them a maniac, but if someone's going really slow, you call them an idiot?" Why is that? They notice things. But sometimes they can notice a lot of things, but they can't put it together. And that can push them towards drug abuse, that can push them towards alcoholism, push towards depression, and then madness or suicide. So this is a huge thing, a huge problem. And he also says on this page, he mentions people who've been deprived of the gift of sight, but they're happy and content. This is on page 20. And he also says, you can look at many people and see the harshest manifestations of misery and poverty, yet their hearts remain throbbing with amazing mirth and joy that you can only conceive of in the memories of your childhood, right? And it's interesting it says childhood, and we'll get into that in the next chapter. Now, on this note, it reminds me of a story. This is someone from my wife's family. Very interesting brother, very interesting Muslim brother. I won't say an actual name. He's my brother-in-law's brother-in-law. That's the lead. Now he's a very interesting man because he always has a positive twist on things. He always thinks things positively. So he got into a situation, this idea of you seeing someone that's actually very, very happy despite the manifestations. Allah struck him with an affliction where one of his children, he had a young son, I think maybe 4 or 5 years old, who actually came down with cancer. It was a huge tribulation. Was diagnosed with cancer, I think in the eye. And alhamdulillah, just cut this long story short, the child is fine now. Alhamdulillah, the child is fine now. Thankful, praise Allah. But when the day they received the news from the doctor, and also he and his wife were absolutely shattered by this news, devastated. And he started contemplating. Okay, so he started thinking about Allah. He started thinking, like, wait, why does Allah want this to happen? Why does Allah cause this? What's the reason? And he went out for a drive just to clear his thoughts and to think and to contemplate. Now, I forget what he actually said to me, but he said while he was driving, he saw some sort of sign. He got some source. He saw something. Like, I don't mean like a billboard. I mean like a sign from Allah, like an ayah. He saw some sort of sign, and that sign made him happy. Like some sort of sign from Allah came that everything will be okay. So he sees this sign and he gets really, really happy. So he's driving, and he gets a smile on his face. He thinks, "Wow!" And it's not just the sign. It's not just what the sign was indicating, but it was the sign itself. He's thinking, "Wow, Allah actually just showed me something." And he was so happy that Allah had just showed him something that he had a big smile on his face. And then he goes home, right? Now at home, his wife is there. I think other family members are there, and they're all really, really sad. And they're thinking about this poor son who's been diagnosed with cancer. What are they going to do? Is he going to survive? And the atmosphere in the home is almost like a funeral. It's very, very depressing. He walks into the house with a big ear-to-ear smile on his face. Because Allah has shown him something, right? So he walks in with that big smile, and his wife's like, "What's wrong with you? Are you insane?" And he says, No. Allah showed me something. I'm just really happy Allah showed me something. And that totally turned the situation on its head. And he became very, very positive that things would be resolved, things would work out, his son would be okay. And sure enough, that's what happened. They found a doctor who could do it, who could take care of it. They made the arrangements. They got the son treated, and now he's fine. So this sort of just reminds me of him. He's just one of those interesting brothers. He's not a faqih or a scholar. He's just someone who they're able to see the positive things. they're able to take a tribulation and see, okay, what does Allah want from me in this situation? What is Allah asking of me? And then saying that, you know, Allah will do something good, right? And that's something that comes up later on in the book, where Imam al-Buti, he defines, he says, what is patience? Patience is the hope that something good will happen. That's what patience is. You maintain that hope that eventually something good will happen. So that's something very, very powerful. The other thing that comes here up on this page, which is worth talking about, is this footnote. We have a footnote here on page 20. This footnote number 5, where he talks about the people fall into this madness from committing suicide. He says there's this inability to put a finger. If you look at the footnote, he talks about there's people who have an inability to put a finger on the cause of one's misery. And this is an interesting thing, because Imam al-Buti talks about this in another book of his, which we'll be working on, inshallah, called al-Hub fil Quran, Love in the Quran. And it's also going to be discussed in a book on the subject of depression that we're working on as well. Nawabooks, so be on the lookout for that. But there's an interesting thing to point out here, because in that book, al-Hub fil Quran, Imam al-Buti talks about, you see, this is another thing about sadness and depression and misery, is that you can't put your finger on it, but the very nature of who we are as human beings means that we're always, always, always going to feel like something is missing. We're always going to have that feeling that something is missing in our lives. Why? Because we are binary of nature, right? We're a body and we're a ruh. We're a jasad and a ruh. We're a body and we're a spirit. And the nature of the ruh, or the relationship between the ruh and the jasad in this life, is that the ruh is trapped within the jasad, right? The ruh has to go where the ruh has to go where the body goes. The body goes to sleep, goes to bed, that's where the ruh goes. The body goes out somewhere, that's where the ruh goes. Whereas in the next life, in the akhirah, it's the other way around. The jasad, the body, is subject to the ruh, and the ruh has its freedom. The nature of the ruh is to be free. Now, Imam al-Buti talked about this, and he said, if you go back, you go to the Quran and you look at Surah Al-Araf, the 7th chapter, verse 172, where Allah says, when Allah took out the loins of the children of Adam from their the progeny from the loins of the children of Adam, and he made them testify against themselves, and he said, Alastu bi rabbikum? Qalu bala shahidna. And they said, indeed, we bear witness. And Allah says, you don't say on the day of judgment that we were heedless of this. But the point is this, that obviously that wasn't us in a bodily form, but that was us in terms of our ruh, our spirits. We're all once, before this world was created, before we came into this world, all of our spirits were once standing before Allah. We were all there. We were all standing before Allah, and Allah spoke to us. And Allah said, am I not your Lord? And we all said, yes, we are our Lord. You are our Lord. So what that means is, ever since that time, our ruh is yearning for that meeting once again. There's a part of you, it's in your ruh, and Imam Buti talks about this. He says you can even find this, these people might not be Muslim, they could be atheist, secularists. They're going to say there's something missing, there's something wrong, and I don't know why. I can't put a finger on it. There's something that troubles me, there's something that causes me anger, there's something like I'm yearning for something, but I don't know what it is. That's what it is. It's your ruh is yearning to be reunited with Allah once again. And one of the examples he gives, because people might say, well, how can we don't have a memory of this? Well, no, listen, your memory is tied to your hearing and your sight. You didn't have a body then. But part of the evidence for this is human beings love open space. We do have this this inclination towards open space, and especially towards beautiful views, right? We love it, like when we're traveling. I'm sure you have places, again, in Singapore, Malaysia, where you go and you can see wide open spaces, right? If you're in the UK, you can go out to the Lake District, you can go to Scotland, you can go to places, or even just in Yorkshire, you go out and you can see vast hills for a long, for as far as the eye can see. You just see hills and mountains and rivers. And your ruh feels happy because your ruh can look at all that and say, when am I going to be free? When am I going to be free to fly around that landscape and explore it, and then ultimately be united with Allah? This is what your ruh is feeling, and that's why you feel that happiness when you see a view, and you sort of, and sometimes a view can be so stunning, especially if it's a really big mountain range or you're really high up, and it's literally what they call breathtaking. You look and it takes your breath away. But this is what your ruh longs for. That's that thing that's missing, right? That's that little bit that you're missing, that you're yearning for, you're looking for. And that's what Imam discusses in his book, Al-Hubb fil Quran. Very, very beautiful discussion. So the Imam, he concludes this chapter. And again, he says, it's not the affliction itself that causes hardship, rather is the result of the soul's being unable to accommodate it and rise above it. Because again, there's no way to get rid of tribulation in your life. You're going to be tested. We're going to look at some ayat in the next chapter. You're going to be tested. You're going to go through tribulations. You are going to see illnesses. You are going to see people you love pass away. You're going to experience this. You can't control that at all. But you can control how you deal with it. You can control how you get over it, how you overcome it. So that's why he finishes the chapter and he says, really what we need to do is we need to reformulate the question. We shouldn't ask the question as to why is it that some people are healthy and wealthy and so on and so forth, and what do they do to deserve it, whilst other people are poor and sick and suffering, and what do they do to deserve that? Really, the question should be, and this is on page 21, the question should be, why do people's hearts differ as to whether they feel dejected or happy, when the outward purport of divine mercy and justice requires that they be equal in their feelings of happiness and joy? Right? Why aren't we all equal? Why are some people more affected and some people less affected? And that's what he gets into in the second chapter. This is on page 23. And he talks about, or he calls it, there are only two ways, right? There are only two ways to deal with this. There are only two ways that you could actually get over trials and tribulations. The first way, he says, is he talks about a supernatural ability not to let your inner dialogue and your negative thoughts affect your soul. So this is the first strategy, but it's not really a strategy because it's a supernatural ability. Now the problem here, and he talks about the fact of how we remember the past and you feel pain, you think about the future and you get anxious and worry. You think, is this plan going to work out? Is this project going to work out? What's going to happen to my job? What's going to happen to my family? How am I going to get my kids married off? All these kinds of things. And two words come to mind here, which is hem and huzn. Hem and huzn. And we have the dua on how becoming hammi wa huzn. Imam Abdul Rahman al-Jawzi, the great Hanbali scholar, he has a book called Al-Tib al-Ruhani. Tib al-Ruhani, literally spiritual medicine, right? You might call that psychology avant la lettre, as we say in French. We say it in English, but we stole the word from the French. Avant la lettre means like you're talking about something, you're giving it a name before the thing actually exists, right? We're calling something psychology before psychology was actually something that was studied in the West. But hem and huzn, again, Imam Ibn al-Jawzi, he explains, he says, hem is translated as grief, as not grief, but worry or anxiety. And hem is always about the future. You have hem about the future. You're worried about your job, you're worried about your family, you're worried about your studies, you're worried about your investments, you're worried about your income, you're worried about will you be healthy? Are you going to get some sort of illness? Are you going to solve all of those, this problem or that problem? And then huzn is grief, and that's about the grief or sadness, and that's attached to the past. You're thinking about the past and past events, and you're remembering sad things that happened and how they affected you, and maybe you're thinking like could I have done something different, and so on and so forth, which again, that's dangerous. Yeah, lately Mr. Wassam warned us against that, not saying if only. So what Imam al-Jawzi gets back is you have to stay focused on the present, right? You want to stay focused on the present moment and not get sucked away into stressing all about the present, about the future, or getting sad or grieving about the past. And now, why then do we have this ability? This is what he discussed on page 24. He said, why then do we have this ability? Why do we have this ability to think about both the past and think about the future? Well, that goes back to Surah al-Baqarah, ayahs 29 and 30, where Allah says, I'm putting a Khalifa in the earth. We are the Khalifa on the earth. That's what we are. We're these Khulafa on the earth. Allah has appointed us, our species, to build the earth and develop the earth. Now, we can't do that unless we have an ability to think about the past, to think about the past and think about the future. We have to be able to think about the past, take lessons from the past, and then plan for the future. We have to have that ability. If we don't have that ability, we can't do anything. Because what we do is we want to learn from our mistakes as individuals. We want to learn from the mistakes of other people. We want to learn from the mistakes of people in terms of at the collective level, whether it's as a country, as a nation, as a tribe, as a civilization. We want to know, okay, why did such and such civilization fall? What happened to the Romans? What happened to the Ottomans? What happened to the Abbasids? What happened to the British? What happened to them? We want to understand. But we also want to look at people. Why did his business fail? Why did his marriage fall apart? Why did he lose his job? Why did he not finish his degree? We want to know these things. They can be troubling, but we want to know so that as we move forward into the future, we don't make the same mistakes. If we did not have that ability to look at the past, identify things that are wrong in the past, identify mistakes, identify problems that came up. If we didn't have that ability, how would we plan for the future? How would we build anything? So he said, if we didn't have this ability, we would be like children. We would be like animals, right? Like sometimes a child can be very, very happy. Why? Because they can't contemplate the past or the future. You know, if like next time you're with family, right? Especially if you have family who live in who live far away from each other, and you go and you visit. You know, if you go visit your cousins or you visit kids, right? When you're saying goodbye to fellow adults, people get emotional. People might cry, say, "Oh, I'm not going to see you for a long time. I'm not going to see you till next year." And there's tears in the eyes. And the little kid might just be like, "Bye." He's smiling, right? He's smiling. Assalamu alaikum. He's just smiling because he doesn't know, right? He's 4 years old. He doesn't understand. He can't contemplate the fact that, okay, he might not see you for a year. He might not see you for 2 years because they're not on that level. So part of the blessing that Allah's given us is that we know how to take lessons from the past. We know how to plan for the future. And because we have that ability, we are going to get anxieties and worries and grief and sorrow. So that's the first way. And that's impossible because we'd have to be insane. We'd have to be a child. We'd have to be an animal. It's not going to happen. So the second way, and this is really, really important, and this is what the Imam finishes on for this chapter, is the second way is to know Allah. We have to know Allah, and we have to know why we're created. So he gives us a whole series of ayat, but the key thing here is that in order to manifest our slavery to Allah, because again, look at this ayah. There's an ayah, this one on page 20, there's a few on page 25. Allah says, "Kullu nafsin dha'iqatul maut wa nabluukum bisharri bil khairi fitnatan wa ilayna turja'un." We test you with both good and evil as a trial, and you'll be returned to us. So you're tested with both good and evil. We have both. You're going to have ease and hardship. You're going to have times of blessings and abundance, and you'll have times of restriction and times of difficulty. And the other ayah that really comes to mind here, again, ayah 26, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِنَ الْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ. Now, the next ayah, this is 155. Allah says, we will definitely test you with a certain amount of fear and hunger and a loss of wealth and life and fruits. But give good news to the patient, or give good news to the steadfast. Now, the tafsir, part of naqsim al-amwal wal anfus wa thamarat. But thamarat actually has to do with death of children. Like it says fruit, but it's actually death of children because your children are your fruits. You produce them. So thamarat is the death of children. There's one hadith that Sheikh Ali Sabuni mentioned in his tafsir, Safat al-Tafasir, where the angels are talking to Allah about a man, a slave of Allah, whose his son was taken from him. And Allah asked the angel, they said, what is my slave doing? What is my slave? How is he responding? And the angels say, Yahmaduka wa yastarja. Right? He praises you and he does what's called istirja. Istirja means to say, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. That's the next ayah. That's Surah Al-Baqarah, ayah 156. To say, to Allah we belong. Inna lillah, like we are for Allah. We belong to Allah. Wa inna ilayhi raji'un. And to him we return. And then Allah says to the angels, build for my slave a house in paradise and call it Bayt al-Hamd. Call it the house of praise. This is his reward. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. And this is the real crux of the matter here, because when we say that we belong to Allah, that means what? We're an owned slave. Allah owns us. We're Allah's property. And in order to manifest the slave to Allah, it's necessary to have both ease and hardship. Because in ease, you manifest gratitude. In hardship, you manifest patience. You have both. And you can't recognize one without the other. How do you recognize ease unless you can compare it with hardship? How do you recognize hardship unless you compare it with ease? You have to have both. So this is how we manifest our slave to Allah. And then and once you understand all this, you understand this is all coming from Allah, then you can be patient. That's why another great ayah that comes up here is, if you look at, it's not mentioned in the book, but another ayah, I came across this just a few days ago. So the Taghabun, the 64th chapter, ayah 11, Allah says, Ma asaba min musibatin illa bi'idhnillah. وَمَنْ يُؤْمِنْ بِاللَّهِ يَهْدِ قَلْبَهُ. Right? Like no affliction comes to you except by Allah's permission. And whoever believes in Allah, يَهْدِ قَلْبَهُ. Allah guides his heart. Allah guides his heart. Now, there are different, like Imam al-Jawzi in his tafsir, he mentioned different interpretations of this. Yahdi qalba means that it makes the person accept. Like Yahdi qalba means like in your heart, you accept it. You accept the tribulation of Allah, you accept and you're content. Another definition, another interpretation is that you do istirja, right? You say, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Another definition is, another interpretation is that you're grateful for it. Right, you're patient because it's a tribulation. You're grateful when you're in ease. And Imam al-Jawzi even mentions like there's one qira'ah which mentions yahdi qalba. Instead of the root being hada, it's hada'a, which means to be calm. And it's a qalba, it's called buh. So whoever believes in Allah, his heart finds peace, his heart finds ease, even though he's in the face of tribulation. So that's why this chapter ends. Sorry, my throat's a bit dry. How astonishing is the believer's affair. His entire affair is good. This is only true for the believer. In times of ease, he is grateful, and this is good for him. In times of difficulty, he is patient, and this is good for him. Now, and what we're going to talk about next time, inshallah, let's just open the door for this, is the secret behind all of this. And one of the things we're going to get at looking at this next time is the fact that, as Allah says himself in Surah Al-Anbiya, the 21st chapter, verse 23, La yus'alu amma yaf'al. Like Allah is not asked about what he does. We don't question Allah about what he does. So the key here to deal with these tribulations is to submit to them and to accept them and to be content with them and to turn to Allah and to build a relationship with Allah in that situation. And with Allah alone is every success. Alhamdulillah. So we'll open the floor then for Q&A, inshallah.